Periyava Sharanam, Glimpses from Sri Periyava's Life History, Volume 3, Chapter 10, Continued. I look at him in silence. This short man is clad in the ochre-colored robe of a monk and leans his weight on a friar's staff. I have been told that he is on the right side of 40. Hence, I am surprised to find his hair quite grey. His noble face, pictured in grey and brown, takes an honoured place in the long portrait gallery of my memory. That elusive element which the French aptly term spiritual is present in this face. His expression is modest and mild, the large dark eyes being extraordinarily tranquil and beautiful. The nose is short, straight, and classically regular. There is a rugged little beard on his chin, and the gravity of his mouth is most noticeable. Such a face might have belonged to one of the saints who graced the Christian church during the Middle Ages, except that this one possesses the added quality of intellectuality. I suppose we of the practical West would say that he has the eyes of a dreamer. Somehow, I feel in an inexplicable way that there is something more than mere dreams behind those heavy lids. Your Holiness has been very kind to receive me, I remark, by the way of introduction. He turns to my companion, the writer, and says something in the vernacular. I guess its meaning correctly. His Holiness understands your English, but he is too afraid that you will not understand his own. So he prefers to have me translate his answers, says Venkatramani. I shall sweep through the earlier phases of this interview because they are more concerned with myself than with this Hindu primate. He asks about my personal experiences in the country. He is very interested in ascertaining the exact impressions which Indian people and institutions make upon a foreigner. I give him my candid impressions, mixing praise and criticism freely and frankly. The conversation then flows into wider channels, and I am much surprised to find that he regularly reads English newspapers and that he is well informed upon current affairs in the outside world. Indeed, he is not unaware of what the latest noise at Westminster is about, and he knows also through what painful travail the troublous infant of democracy is passing in Europe. I remember Venkatramani's firm belief that Sri Shankara possesses prophetic insight. It touches my fancy to press for some opinion about the world's future. When do you think that the political and economic conditions everywhere will begin to improve? A change for the better is not easy to come by quickly, he replies. It is a process which must take some time. How can things improve when the nations spend more each year on the weapons of death? Paul Brunton, there is nevertheless much talk of disarmament today. Does that count? Maha Periyava, if you scrap your battleships and let your cannons rust, that will not stop war. People will continue to fight even if they have to use sticks. Paul Brunton, but what can be done to help matters? Maha Periyava, nothing but spiritual understanding between one nation and another, and between rich and poor, will produce goodwill and thus bring real peace and prosperity. Paul Brunton, that seems far off. Our outlook is hardly cheerful. Then His Holiness rests his arm a little more heavily upon his staff. There is still God, he remarks gently. If there is, he seems very far away, I boldly protest. God has nothing but love towards mankind, comes the soft answer. Judging by the unhappiness and wretchedness which afflict the world today, he has nothing but indifference. I break out impulsively, unable to keep the bitter force of irony out of my voice. His Holiness looks at me strangely. Immediately, I regret my hasty words. Maha, the eyes of a patient man see deeper. God will use human instruments to adjust matters at the appointed hour. The turmoil among nations, the moral wickedness among people, and the suffering of miserable millions will provoke, as a reaction, some great divinely inspired man to come to the rescue. In this sense, every century has its own savior. The process works like a law of physics. The greater the wretchedness caused by spiritual ignorance, materialism, the greater will be the man who will arise to help the world. Paul Brunton, then do you expect someone to arise in our time too? In our century, he corrects. Assuredly, the need of the world is so great and its spiritual darkness is so thick that an inspired man of God will surely arise. Is it your opinion then that men are becoming more degraded? I query. No, I do not think so, he replied tolerantly. There is an indwelling divine soul in man which, in the end, must bring him back to God. But there are ruffians in our Western cities who behave as though there were indwelling demons in them. I counter, thinking of the modern gangster. Maha, do not blame people so much as the environments into which they are born. Their surroundings and circumstances force them to become worse than they really are. That is true of both the East and West. Society must be brought into tune with a higher note. Materialism must be balanced by idealism. There is no other real cure for the world's difficulties. The troubles into which countries are everywhere being plunged are really the agonies which will force this change, just as failure is frequently a signpost pointing to another road. Paul Brunton, you would like people to introduce spiritual principles into their worldly dealings then? Maha, quite so. It is not impracticable because it is the only way to bring about results which will satisfy everyone in the end and which will not speedily disappear. And if there were more men who had found spiritual light in the world, it would spread more quickly. India, to its honor, supports and respects its spiritual men, though less so than in former times. If all the world were to do the same and to take its guidance from men of spiritual vision, then all the world would soon find peace and grow prosperous. Our conversation trails on. I am quick to notice that Sri Shankara does not decry the West in order to exalt the East, as so many in his land do. He admits that each half of the globe possesses its own set of virtues and vices, and that in this way they are roughly equal. He hopes that a wiser generation will fuse the best points of Asiatic and European civilizations into a higher and balanced social scheme. I drop the subject and ask permission for some personal questions. It is granted without difficulty. How long has Your Holiness held this title? Since 1907. At the time, I was only 12 years old. 4 years after my appointment, I retired into a village on the banks of the Kaveri, where I gave myself up to meditation and study for 3 years. Then only did my public work begin. You rarely remain in your headquarters in Kumbakonam, I take it. The reason for that is that I was invited by Maharaja of Nepal in 1918 to be his guest for a while. I accepted, and since then I have been travelling slowly towards his state in the far north. But see, during all those years I have not been able to advance more than a few hundred miles, because the tradition of my office requires that I stay in every village and town which I pass on the route, or which invites me if it is not too far off. I must give a spiritual discourse in the local temple and some teaching to the inhabitants. I broach the matter of my quest, and His Holiness questions me about the different yogis or holy men I have so far met. After that, I frankly tell him I would like to meet someone who has high attainments in yoga and can give some sort of proof or demonstration of them. There are many of your holy men who can only give one more talk when they are asked for this proof. Am I asking too much? The tranquil eyes met mine. There is a pause for a whole minute. His Holiness fingers his beard. If you are seeking initiation into real yoga of the higher kind, then you are not seeking too much. Your earnestness will help you. While I can perceive the strength of your determination, but a light is beginning to awaken within you, which will guide you to what you want without doubt. I am not sure whether I correctly understand him. So far, I have depended on myself for guidance. Even some of your ancient sages say that there is no other God than that which is within ourselves, I hazard. And the answer swiftly comes. God is everywhere. How can one limit him to one's own self? He supports the entire universe. I feel that I am getting out of my depth, and immediately turn the talk away from this semi-theological strain. What is the most practical course for me to take? Go on with your travels. When you have finished them, think of the various yogis and holy men you have met. Then pick out the one who makes most appeal to you. Return to him, and he will surely bestow his initiation upon you. I look at his calm profile and admire its singular serenity. But suppose, Your Holiness, that none of them makes sufficient appeal to me, what then? In that case, you will have to go on alone until God Himself initiates you. Practice meditation regularly. Contemplate the higher things with love in your heart. Think often of the soul, and that will help to bring you to it. The best time to practice is the hour of waking. The next best time is the hour of twilight. The world is calmer at those times and will disturb your meditations less. He gazes benevolently at me. I begin to envy the saintly peace which dwells on his bearded face. Surely his heart has never known the devastating upheavals which have scarred mine. I am stirred to ask him impulsively. If I fail, may I then turn to you for assistance? To be continued, Periyava Sharanam.